problem isn't Ponce's injury. It's what it reveals. Because just a few days ago, the Toronto Blue Jays rotation looked deep, almost comfortable, one of those you look at and think, okay, they can get through the season without panic. And then reality hits. Fast, clean, no warning. Cody Ponce went down, and with him, the illusion of stability. And here's the thing, nobody builds a rotation thinking about the sixth guy. Everybody builds it thinking about collapse. Because when you look at it now, what's actually left? Kevin Gausman, Dylan Cease, Eric Lauer, and Max Scherzer. 4 arms. That's it. 4. And an MLB season doesn't accept 4. Now stop for a second, because there's a detail here that changes everything. It's not just who's out, it's who's out at the same time. Jose Barrios, Shane Bieber, Trey Yesovich, and Bowden Francis all started the year injured. That's not an adjustment, that's a domino effect. And when your 5th starter goes down too, it's not just a gap, it's a structural test. And then the name shows up, Luis Severino. Not by coincidence, not as a luxury, out of necessity. According to Zachary D. Reimer from Bleacher Report, the Oakland Athletics right-hander has emerged as a direct target. And that says a lot more about where this team is than it does about the player himself. Because, let's be honest, Severino isn't the kind of name that raises a contender's ceiling. He doesn't walk in and take the rotation to another level. He shows up to keep it from collapsing. And that completely changes the conversation. The more optimistic fan will say, it makes sense, experienced arm solves the short term. But does it really? Last year, a 4.54 ERA. Not a disaster. Not a solution either. It's in between. And sometimes in between is the most dangerous place to be, because it gives you the feeling of safety without actually giving you control. And here comes the uncomfortable question. Is it worth spending assets for temporary stability? Because the Toronto Blue Jays context isn't simple. Trey Yesovich and Shane Bieber are coming back, eventually. And when they do, you don't have a shortage problem anymore. You have a crowding problem. 6 names, maybe 7, depending on how you count. So what feels like urgency today turns into congestion. But until then, there are games, a lot of games, and they're not waiting for anyone to heal. So the front office is stuck in that uncomfortable space between now and 2 months from now. And that's where bad decisions usually get made. Now, let's flip the perspective. Why would the Oakland Athletics be willing to move Severino? It's not performance, it's direction. The team is looking ahead to 2028, the move to Las Vegas, a quiet rebuild. And in that timeline, Severino doesn't fit. Contract through 2026. A player option for 2027 that doesn't excite anyone. In other words, a short-term asset on a long-term team. And in the market, that means one thing, accessible price. And that's where the deal starts to make sense. Not because Severino is perfect, but because he might be cheap enough to justify the risk. But this is where it gets complicated, because cheap in theory isn't always cheap in reality. What can Toronto actually give up without hurting future depth? Because trading for a patch and then needing another patch is the kind of cycle that ruins a season. And nobody talks about that. Everyone talks about the trade in isolation. Nobody talks about the accumulated effect. Let's be real. Severino joining this rotation today doesn't raise the ceiling, but it might raise the floor. And sometimes that's exactly what a contender needs to avoid slipping early in the season. But that comes with an invisible cost. You're betting that the injuries are truly temporary. The starters will return on schedule. Severino won't become more of a problem than a solution. If any one of those fails, the trade becomes dead weight. And there's a human element here that people don't like to touch. Because inside the clubhouse, these decisions aren't neutral. When you bring in an outside arm, you're sending a message to guys already there trying to step up, trying to earn their spot. We don't fully trust you. And that matters, especially for younger players. Especially for guys coming back from injury, who already feel like the ground beneath them isn't stable. Now shift the perspective again. What if the problem isn't the rotation? What if the problem is the expectation that this rotation has to be perfect? Because maybe, just maybe, the mistake is trying to fix everything at once. Maybe the team needs to survive, not dominate, but that requires patience. And patience isn't exactly a strong currency in April. Meanwhile, the league is watching. The Atlanta Braves and New York Mets are also listed as possible destinations, which means it's not just Toronto evaluating Severino. It's a small market with multiple interested teams and an asset that won't wait around. And that creates pressure, because if you hesitate, someone else gets him. If you rush, you might pay more than you should. That's the game. So let's strip it down. Toronto gains an available arm right now. Toronto loses future flexibility and possibly assets that might matter more later. Oakland gains future pieces. Oakland loses a functional short-term starter, something that, honestly, doesn't change much for them. Severino gains immediate relevance on a competitive team. Severino loses stability, stepping into a pressure environment from pitch one. That's it. No sugarcoating. And the fans? They're in that familiar spot, torn between urgency and caution. They want movement. They want action. They want to feel like the front office isn't standing still. But they've seen this before. They know how it ends when you trade too much too early for solutions that weren't really solutions. So the final question isn't whether the Toronto Blue Jays should go after Luis Severino. The question is more uncomfortable than that. Do they actually trust what they already have? Or did Cody Ponce's injury expose an insecurity that was already there, just hidden? Because if that's the case, Severino doesn't fix it. He just delays it. So what's your call? Do you pay the price now, or hold your breath and wait for the reinforcements to come back?